The Empress Eager Udders by Jason Shannon. This is the author. Quaestor Flavenius panted heavily, his weight coming down atop the young tart. The Quaestor was a young stud, 28 years old, and had taken a healthy dose of arugula earlier, which should have kept him ravenous and excited all night long. Now he was slick with sweat, panting heavily, his body engulfed in heat, despite the Carthaginian slave girls fanning him vigorously. He had crested Elysium thrice now inside her, and could go no further if the Huns were about to barge in and demand it at Gladius Point. He tried to kiss the dancer, yet she turned her head aside. While Venus had allowed her to glimpse Elysium quite a few times this night, merely glimpsing it did not sate her. She wanted to bathe in the glorious bathhouses, drink delicious wine from the exquisite fountains. She wanted it all. Flavenius stood from the bed, a little disappointed with himself. Why should he be? None of the other 12 guests at this dinner party had been enough for her. They all lounged about on chaise longues now, being soaped down by slave girls and replenished with wine, and none of them had lasted as long as Flavenius. The Quaestor's wife, grunting behind the woman's back, had by now outlasted her husband. She had her own phallus, strapped upon her pubis with leather belts and a sort of apparatus sometimes seen in brothels, used by females of the persuasion of the poet of Lesbos. Yet even she was at her limit, and her thighs could move no further. She kissed the back of the dancer's shoulder, shifted out from beneath the woman. Languidly she groped for the bath on unstable legs. A slave girl hurried after her mistress, calling, "My lady, let me massageth thy inner thighs, lest thou be unable to mount a horse on the morrow." Theodora lay on the bed. Flavenius was clutching at the chaise longue, gulping wine from a chalice. Angrily she called to him, "Is this all thou hast for me? Is not one of those senators or governors rested enough to finish me?" "My lady, feel free to bathe. See my eunuch Piranus on your way out. You'll be handsomely paid." "Yes, I know who Piranus is. He did performeth cunnilingus earlier when thou had thy slave girl bring forth rigidity to thy phallus. Of course I shall have my money, but money was not the only thing I was promised. Bring in your slaves, the stable hands, the scribes. I shall finish copulating with them if such esteemed high-born men are inadequate." At once, 30 of the house slaves were brought in, among them scribes and horse-trainers and the instructor of Flavenius's gladiators. Some were Dalmatian, some were hairy Germanians, some were black-skinned Libyans. With their master's leave, they each began stripping. The female house slaves, who had by now finished bathing and feeding olives to the Quaestor's guests, attended to the men, ensuring each was sexually ready, and that Theodora herself would need waste no time evincing male excitement. Olietta, the Nubian slave girl, poured a copious dollop of olive oil onto her palms, and Theodora spread her legs pliantly for the other woman to reapply slickness. Spread-eagled to the Nubian, the actress turned to the slaves. Commandingly she barked, "Verily, give it to this harlotus." 3 at a time the actress took them all, one behind, one in front, and one standing above, legs split, taking from her Iramatio. She found herself betwixt 2 Germanians, with a Spaniard at her lips. The Spaniard moved eagerly. Her body tried to repel the man, and copious spittle ran down her face. Her throat suddenly free momentarily, she gasped for breath, using her hand on the Spaniard whilst she filled her lungs. Below, the 2 Germanians thrust vehemently. In her Elysium, she grabbed at her own mammæ, kneaded the voluptuous flesh. Turning to the ceiling, she suddenly spat. "Curse thee, Jupiter! Curse thee to Mars's wrath! Why didst thou sculpt my body such that my nipples may also not receive men thusly? This restrictive body thou hast cursed me with has but vexatious limitations to satiate my libidinal needs." She quickly reached behind the Spaniard, her fingers finding passage to the prostrata, and massaging hard. She belted out one more vile epithet. "Venus, thou art a cunness for such a curse!" Then she devoured the Spaniard's eager manhood once more. Suddenly, speaking out of turn the feeble slave, the Germanian stableman behind her panted something in his barbarian tongue. She had performed for many barbarians in the past, and spoke some of the northern tongue. The blue-eyed slave in her rear passage said something to the effect of, "See, I told you she'd say it." The language was not Transrhinian, as she'd expected, but perhaps Britannian? She remembered an emissary from the court of Artorius' kingdom who she'd lain with. The language seemed mixed with the pirate tongue of the northern seas. She'd like to be bent over by a pirate. Then the barbarian in the front passage said, Fine, I owe you 20 denarii. Now shut up and let me finish. The barbarian reached fruition within her back passage, removed himself, and hastily retreated to dress in elaborate garb. It had pantaloons marking his barbarity. The other stable hand in the front passage quickly finished as well, bowed out, and also dressed in Germanic pantaloons, strapping a large pack onto his back. The actress thought the bizarre Germanic tongue and the hefty garb quite queer, but she dwelt on this only momentarily, before pulling back from the Spaniard in her oral cavity, swallowing hungrily, taking a breath, and saying to the rest of the slaves, "Well, are you just going to stand there? Hop to it, slaves! Who's next?" As the next 3 slaves embraced her, there was a flash of light and a queer wind that blew through the adjoining room. Yet Theodora hardly noticed it. This concludes the reading of The Empress Eager Udders by Jason Shannon. A while ago I had an idea for a series of short stories called The Pranksters' Guide to Time Travel. The idea is that 2 jokers on a time travel squad would jump back and forth throughout history, playing fast and loose with the rules, and overall having a good time. It was originally conceived of as a single short story with multiple points of history, but quickly became too long and was broken into multiple stories. The Empress Eager Udders is a story that remained on its own, and it didn't seem quite appropriate to send this out to magazines in the hopes of being published. If you enjoyed this story, I'd encourage you to check out my books. I have 4 novels available. The Zimmer Insurgency, a fast-paced sci-fi political thriller which takes place over the course of 22 hours. The Hounds of Harrigan, a 1,200-page post-apocalyptic epic of global conquest under a neo-Mongol empire. The Moon Panther, a collection of 4 novellas in a dystopian Australia, featuring femme fatale assassins, a Machiavellian concubine, and ruthless desert bandits. And Rain's Agenda, wherein our narrator makes a startling discovery about female liberation in a time on the brink of World War IV. Go to www.jasonmshannon.com for free excerpts and links to buy. Music by Julie Beats via looperman.com. Text copyright 2022 by Jason Shannon. Production copyright 2022 by Jason Shannon. All rights reserved. No part of this recording may be played for an audience or reproduced in any form. It may not be streamed, downloaded, broadcast, or copied without prior written consent from the author. Address all inquiries to jm1shannon@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.